host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and we're very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We have with us the author of this book, Arousing the Goddess, Sex and Love in the Buddhist Ruins of India. So this book is touching upon some of my favorite subjects: love, Buddhism, and sex. And they're all rolled up in here in a rather extraordinary narrative that Tim tells about time he has spent in India and actually all over Southeast Asia. But in this particularly, his ventures into Buddhism and what that led to. So it's a very interesting story, which we'll all be hearing more of today with Tim's story. Also, it's interesting to note that Tim began his life, essentially, in the world of evangelical Christianity as a Baptist. So that makes the story actually even with more punch, because we hear and will hear how it unfolds. Great to have you on.
It's good to be here, Mitchell.
Good. Now, how did a nice Baptist boy from Canada end up walking around, the streets of Delhi in search for Buddhist understanding?
Well, ever since I became a Christian, which really, I had sort of a born-again experience in my late teens, but I always felt that my faith should be not a crutch, but like a walking stick. And I felt that Christianity was a tool which would help me really explore the world well and sort of give me a set of beliefs that could help me try to make sense of the world. But I really was curious. I wanted to find out what the world held. And when I finished college, more than anything else in the world, I wanted to go to India, really precisely to challenge my faith and see what the beliefs that I had been brought up with would make of this world that was so different.
You were raised Christian.
That's right. I was raised Christian, and then I, sort of as a young adult, joined a church on my own.
A separate church?
That's right. My parents were actually Episcopalians or Anglicans, we call them in Canada. But I had a conversion experience in my late teens.
Born again,
very sort of radically fundamentalist Christian. But that fundamentalism to me was just, like I say, a tool to better grasp the world with. And going to India really did challenge it in many ways, and it certainly broke off a lot of hard edges.
So while you were obviously inspired by the Christian belief at that moment in time in your teenage years, there was some part of you that was, in a sense, free or observing that and wanted to look at it from another view, or even questioned what you were embracing.
That's right. I had this
Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I'd say so. I had this tremendous sense of God, of the divine, but I didn't really believe that Christianity had the market cornered on that.
Oh, okay.
And in India, I would see, God-men like Sai Baba, whose followers said he heals the sick, he raises the dead, he causes the blind to see. Well, what does that do to one's Christian beliefs? It really challenges them. Yeah. In the Himalayas, I studied in a monastery there for several months, and the head monk was like the Dalai Lama, a reincarnated lineage. And this man had the most beautiful, serene, sweet spirit of anybody I'd ever met. And I had to admit, whatever spirituality there was, he knew it. He was in touch with it. Right. And so the sort of
and he wasn't a Christian.
That's right. Oh, no, he was.
Right.
He was
of course. I'm saying, of course.
So a lot of these hard edges and dogmatic beliefs really started to fall away. But there was still so much that I found really challenged my beliefs in India. And
that's so healthy.
Yeah, and this book, Arousing the Goddess, is much about.
It's such a great name. In fact, when I first saw the name of the book, Tim, I got aroused, dealing with some of my favorite subjects here. We're speaking with Tim Ward, the author of this wonderful book that he'll be telling us about more in detail. So then, what happened? You went to India on this trek. You were attending a conference in Delhi, on an international conference on Buddhists from all over Southeast Asia.
All over the world, actually.
All over the world. And you were walking around saffron robes and...
Well, that's right. And I had come from a monastery in the Himalayas, where I was studying, among other things, how to overcome desire, which is very important for the Buddhists. You cut the bonds of your desire, and sexual desire, of course, is one of the main things.
By the way, but
Yeah,
we'll
but
get into
that's
that
how it's
later.
actually practiced and
Yeah,
taught. You need
yeah.
to cut the cords of your sexual
Yes, yes,
desire.
yes.
So I've been working on that for like 3 months, and then I go to this conference in New Delhi when it's over. And one of the first things that I do is I meet this woman who really stood out in the crowd. She had long blonde hair,
Golden blonde.
blue, yeah, that's right, blue eyes, and in this room full of Indian people, she just was a real exception,
goddess.
and
A goddess.
she sure seemed that to me, and I suddenly found myself feeling like I was back in junior high school. I was stuttering whenever she came around, and my mouth would get all dry, and I felt like an absolute idiot. But she seemed to like that, and we hit it off fairly well during the conference.
She enjoyed your fumbling.
I think she did, and at the end I asked if she'd like a research assistant, because she was doing her own doctorate research on Buddhist art, and she said yes, so we agreed to travel together for a while through some of the most remote and little visited parts of India.
Yes.
And,
and
and well, the search that she was on
you had
that
one room and she had another.
That's right. Well, it was interesting, when we went first to Varanasi where she was studying, and there, as a student, she had to be very, very careful about not even seeming like she had a boyfriend around, because her reputation in India, was one that had to be maintained virginally. But the minute we started traveling together, we had to travel as husband and wife for just the same reasons. So we went to these two very different extremes. And
it should be said that India is one of the most sexually uptight places in the world. Forget the Kama Sutra. I mean, they really, you must do what you did. Otherwise, she would be chastised. It becomes a very difficult thing. Being Western, it's a little easier. You have a little bit more latitude, but in general, there are problems. I mean, it's a highly strict country.
absolutely.
And people don't really realize that from afar.
That's
You have to
right.
kind of be in it to feel the vibes, if you will, the dynamics of what it's like, and to be at variance with the cultural mores.
Absolutely. And for her, actually, it was good to be traveling with a man, because a single European woman traveling alone just attracts so much attention. That is very, very uncomfortable. And I got to actually appreciate this much more traveling with her. The constant barrage that she was under of this unwanted attention.
Yeah. So
we were traveling around looking for statues of the Buddha in a particular pose called the earth-touching gesture. This is where the Buddha is seated, and you see one of his hands is reaching down and touching the ground. And the story behind that she explained to me was the reason why this became such a popular pose of the Buddha. And when the Buddha was meditating in order to become enlightened, the Buddhist devil, whose name is Mara, the Lord of Delusion, tried to prevent him from becoming enlightened. So he sent demons to frighten him off the path, didn't work, sent his seductive daughters to try to sway Buddha from his meditation, didn't work. And then Mara himself said to the Buddha that his meditation would never really bear fruit, because no one else would be able to say that what he had accomplished had any value to it. And the Buddha's response was to reach down and touch the earth, and he said, "The earth will be my witness." And the goddess of the earth, aroused by his words, rises up and says to Mara, "Yes, I will bear witness to what you are about to attain." And it's at that moment that the Buddha becomes enlightened. And for me, this moment was tremendously significant, because all that I'd learned about Buddhism thus far was that the feminine was really an obstacle. Sex, desire, everything was tied up with the feminine, was seen in kind of a negative light. But here at the very moment of enlightenment, the Buddha is calling to the goddess of the earth. And then you think about that scene. What's he doing? He's actually sitting underneath the Bodhi tree. And he's sitting on top, on all the statues you see of him, of a giant lotus blossom. So he's sitting on a flower, and he's calling to the earth goddess. So the scene is rich with feminine imagery. And I began to think, well, maybe there is something in terms of the spiritual connection with the feminine divine that the Buddha had, which is essential for spirituality, and this idea of being spiritual by renouncing desire, by renouncing all contact with the feminine. Maybe that's not a misunderstanding. Now, granted, I had a fair amount of stake in this at this time, because I was in the midst of my own passionate relationship with this woman.
Sure.
But so this was the quest
So
we were on,
interesting.
traveling through very, very remote parts of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, Orissa, and working our way towards Kali's city of Kolkata in West Bengal.
And you kept finding examples.
That's right, looking for statues of this all along the way. And of course, along the way, as happens in India, meeting truly amazing people and coming across some very strange and weird things. One of them was that stays with me most strongly is this place we went to that was the site of an ancient Buddhist university. And there was a little tiny village nearby. But in this village, there was one inhabitant who was dressed like a woman but was actually a man. And I didn't realize until that point, and Sabina told me about this, that there's a whole caste called Hrija of men who are castrated and they live as women. And they steal baby boys, castrate them and raise them as their own daughters. So it's a gruesome thing, and yet it's part of culture. And this village accepted this person as part of the village, and they have a very important rite. They actually dance a certain ritual dance at the birth of a baby boy, ironically. But so there's this strange transvestitism integrated into Indian life that you would think, gee, maybe these uptight Indians would have a problem with that. But no, it has its place, and as long as it has its place in the hierarchy, then it fits. Now, when we get closer and closer to Calcutta, there are more and more grisly things that we experience. And I, in particular, started to feel that the goddess Kali was becoming more and more a presence. And so from being...
What's an example of
that? The poverty that we encountered. And the thing that you see about Kali is how she is the one who is the goddess of death, the goddess of destruction, and all the poor who live on Kali's streets, or Calcutta streets, are Kali's children. And coming to this as a Westerner and as someone with a Christian background, you think, oh, this poverty is horrific. We need to fix this. We need to solve this problem. We need to get some social services in here. But within Hinduism, there's this room for the sick and the maimed and the horrible things that is just accepted as part of the way things is. I'm not saying that that's better or worse, but it's so different from how one comes to it as a Christian.
I mean, it's a different attitude of acceptance, of not embracing might be too much, but just that this is the way life is.
Yes, and also that it's the karma of each of those individuals, and that in a sense, if you give alms to a poor person, you're not benefiting them because their karma is not being affected, but you're benefiting yourself because you've lightened some of your own burden. They're actually doing you a favor by accepting alms from you. I also met two monks.
Why would it not be, and this is an age-old discussion, of course, but why would it not be a reflection of their karma to receive and lighten their suffering? It's got to be.
Certainly. Yeah, although the enlightening of their suffering, if you're being given things beyond the karma you've accumulated, then that might mean that your suffering is not being expiated in this lifetime, and maybe you'll need to spend another life suffering on the streets. I mean, this was the quandary that I faced when I went to one of Mother Teresa's homes, where I saw these incredible acts of grace and beauty on the parts of these nuns, washing people who were very near death, giving them so much compassion. But I had to wonder, does this mean, from a Hindu point of view, that they'll have to come back and dance with Kali on the streets for another lifetime? I had two Buddhist monks very, very seriously take me aside at one point and warn me of the immorality of Christianity. They said, it's a very dangerous religion because it preaches the forgiveness of sins. And in fact, karma is the law. If you believe your sins are forgiven, then what horrible bad karma you may accumulate, let alone that you're just plain deluded.
Right.
So this different perspective really rocked me.
So interesting.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because karma as the law provides fences, as it were, against certain kinds of actions, attitudes, what have you. And if that's removed through the idea of forgiveness, then you have nothing to bound you, to provide some sense of proportion.
Yeah.
It's an interesting perspective. But there's also grace, and even within the Hindu context, there is a sense, there's a place for grace.
Yes.
So the question then becomes, what is the relationship between any kind of grace, like you witnessed in one of Mother Teresa's homes, and karma? There's got to be a relationship.
Yes.
Or is grace some kind of interruption of the law or addition or expansion of the law. I don't know. I'm just spinning off thought.
Exactly. And in Calcutta, for me, where that really came down into a single figure was in the figure of Kali, who is both this goddess of the graveyards and horror and destruction, and yet she's also the mother goddess. Exactly. She's the goddess that many people worship as the feminine divine who gives them good things and holds them close. And I met a Kali worshiper in one of the temples in Calcutta, one of Kali's temples, and she took me to a statue of Kali, and she showed me the typical statue of Kali with 4 arms. And she explained to me the meaning of those arms. And she said the 2 right arms, the one is raised in a blessing, the other one is offering you a gift. The left arms, one is raised and it holds a machete, and the lower one grasps the hair of a freshly severed human head. And I said to her, well, so how do you get the blessing and escape the machete?
Hello, and welcome back
no,
to A
that's
Better
not
World.
At all.
This is your
the
host,
thing
Mitchell
is,
J. Raven, and I'm very glad you're joining us again.
4 arms.
Today, we're going
live
to
life
be
richly, you have to
speaking
accept that there's
with
death and
Deborah
destruction,
Coons Garcia, who's
as
a
well as
filmmaker
blessings
up in this utterly beautiful
when you let her
place
hug
of
you with
hers
all
in
4
Mill
of those
Valley,
arms,
California.
then you really have life.
Deborah has been
So it's not a matter
of a
of
couple
fixing
of
it.
very
It's not a matter of
films,
even
such as
redeeming it. It's
The
a matter of
Future
really
of
letting
Food
all of life
and mostly
embrace you
Symphony
richly.
of the Soil.
And that's one of the things
We've had her on the
that
radio
for
show
me, the goddess
before, and now we're going to
taught me
sit down and
while I
speak
was in
with her in
India.
person about the
What a
work she's
lesson.
been doing and the
What a
impact
lesson.
that
It's
it's
so
having
rich that
on the
really is,
world.
and
A
it's a
world that
perspective
has
that we
become
just
very
don't know
troubled
much of in the
relative
West,
to
and,
its food chain,
and
its
even
food
many
supply,
Indians don't.
as well as
It's
the
of
way
a
we
level
take care of and relate to our
maturation
soil.
that
So
is really difficult to deal with it. But it is symbolized in the iconography and in the gods and goddesses altogether of Vishnu and Shiva. You know, you have the creation, you've got the destruction, and you've got the maintainer. It's, it's there. So any part of any creative cycle is also going to connote the destructive cycle.
Yes. And I found too...
Hence the yugas.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is thought of as the 4th age, the age of Kali, the Kali Yuga, where these destructive forces
Called the age of darkness.
are run wild.
Exactly.
And for me, one of the things this figure of Kali did too is help me realize that inside of myself I have those 4 arms, that I'm capable of being good, kind, serene, but I'm also capable of destruction. And as my Christian self, I spent so much effort trying to expurge the demons in me, the bad in me, and just live. Exactly, and just live in the light.
Hello, and welcome back to A Better World.
And
this
what
is your
that
host,
was doing,
Mitchell
though,
J.
was
Raven,
setting
and
me
we're
up
very
for,
glad you're joining us again today.
First of all, not
today we're going to have
up
another
it.
very
Second of all, really
interesting
repressing
show. We have
parts of
invited
me,
back
which when they did
Sister
come
Natasha
out, as they do
Kolsov,
sometimes
who
in
is the
this
founder
family.
and
My life
director
can be
of
really
Ideal,
destructive
a
because
very
they're
special
unconscious.
community
And
up in Jaffrey,
one of the
British
things
Columbia.
that I
We
learned
shot a
from
show
Kali
up there
is
this past
to
summer, live
recognize
in
there's a
person
time
up there.
for destructiveness.
I went up there
There's a
to
time for
visit
anger.
and
There's a time for
got a
ending-
chance to learn a
ending
lot about
things.
this community. Well,
Just as
now
there's a time
she
for
and some of her community
peace
are
and
in
for-
New York,
for love.
and we're
to
taking this
try to better
opportunity to
balance
sit
those
down with
forces in me
Natasha
is a very
to speak
different
about
way
a few
than the way of the faith that I grew up in.
Yes, indeed.
And when I look at the United States these days, I see the nation as a whole in the throes of something
Hello,
very similar,
and welcome back to A
where,
Better World. This
bad
is your
things
host,
happen
Mitchell
to the
J.
United
Raven,
States
and we're
with
very glad you're joining us
9/11
again
here
today.
here in New York.
Today we're going to have another very
so
interesting
vivid.
show.
And
We
yet
have
America's
invited back
response has been
Sister
to
Natasha
externalize
Kolsov,
the
who is
bad
the founder
guys
and director of
and make
Ideal,
it all
a very
bad
special
over there,
community
which means we're
up in
all
Jaffrey,
good
British
over here.
Columbia.
So we're saying
we
right
shot
now,
a
no,
show
we're
up
the
there this
good
past
guys
summer,
in Iraq.
live
And then
in person
that's,
up there.
that's right. And
I
then
went
these
up there
pictures
to
are turned
visit
to come out
and
completely
got a
incomprehensible
chance to learn a lot
because
of...
we can't reconcile the destructive forces within us. And I think it's something that the nation is in the throes of facing really deeply and unconsciously. And I hope that as individuals we can not turn away from these images, but really try to push deeper to the spiritual truths about ourselves and about our role in the world.
It's a classic expression of projection. It's just, that's what's going on, and it's always gone on in this country too. And I think part of it has to do with its affiliation with Christianity, which it wasn't supposed to have in the first place, state, religion, and all of that. But nonetheless, it happened. It's just my opinion and feeling that Christianity has, for all of the merits it has as well, has this repressive, projective nature. You know, of all, as you're saying, the way you were raised in a way, all good, wearing this cloak of goodness and light, and not dealing with these other animal, and I don't even want to demean it. It's not to be demeaned. It's the dark forces that we have: the anger, the jealousy, the sadness, the grief, the rage even that we have as humans. I mean, if you think about it, rage is a very natural thing. I mean, because we're born into a world that we don't understand, and we try to make sense of it throughout our lives. You know, so hence the quest of going to a place like India and searching your soul, basically. You were looking for it in Christianity, you thought you found it, and yet you were willing to challenge it. It's a pretty noble thing, you know, to go and pick up and go to a place, especially like India, which I know well, and put yourself and subject yourself to those elements, and actively question by putting yourself into a Buddhist monastery, no less. And the way life would have it, the way it got fleshed out, as it were, was to have you instead leave the monastic setting and meet a woman and deal with, you know, your stuff directly. It's kind of a beautiful, holistic story of one's life, isn't it?
So far, yeah.
So far. And just to go back to revisit him, the image of the Buddha touching the ground, which is so famous, and you said it so well about this basically invoking the goddess energy at the moment. It's not just for his spiritual path, it's for his enlightenment. That in a sense you could say, I often look at things both from a Buddhist but also a Taoist point of view, and the combining of the elements of the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine, at that moment is what allowed the realization. So distinct from any idea of just some kind of purely patriarchal idea that is being espoused in Buddhist monasteries all over. But this happens everywhere. It happens in Christianity, it happens in Judaism. There's this idea of venerating the goddess or the feminine in theory, but not in practice. You know, everywhere in synagogues, you know, in Orthodox synagogues, women sit in the back, you know, and they're thought of as high and noble and the mother and all of this, but they're treated awfully. I mean, it's just the same thing again, or Indians, you know, murdering their daughters.
A simple thing.
Anyway,
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So it sounds like your experience and the meeting up of
Introduce this
with
wonderful,
Sabina
wonderful woman
really
saint.
helped to bring you full
And that as
circle.
we go into this time period,
Yes. And coming out of India,
you mention
the thing which stayed with me the strongest is that there is
Please
this
come
role
back
for the
again.
feminine divine.
Okay.
For me personally, has been there
This is
in
Mitchell
being
J.
able to
Baker.
reconcile the good and the dark forces,
know if
because the
you're
goddess
blessed enough, but I know
accepts them
I am.
both in a way that the
Thanks so much
God of
for
my
joining
fathers
us, and
never did. So in that sense, she is also a mother. She accepts the good and the bad, and she works with us, not to try and fix us, but passionately calling us to dance. And much of my spiritual growth post-India has been
Great.
trying to grasp
Yes.
the feminine
We should go around
divine,
hugging.
not only in my spiritual life, but also in my actual life, in terms of my relationships, in terms of how I see women, and in terms of being able to actually love as a man who I think is fairly damaged in my younger years. And this is the subject of my next book, which will be coming out in about a year's time.
Okay. What religion do you venture into then?
I go back to the cradle of Western civilization, to Greece, to Turkey, to Cyprus, looking for the goddess of our own ancient cultures. And my intuition was that by going to their temples and by looking at their statues, I'll catch a resonance of what it was for men of ancient times to worship goddesses and really know the feminine divine deeply. And I've spent 3 or 4 years having that resonance come inside of me, and it shook me to the core and showed me things that I had no idea were inside of myself about my own rage towards the feminine, my own deep feelings of loss, and at the same time my own need for connection with the feminine in so many so many different ways. It's very, very hard on the woman who's my fiancée through all of this because she ended up getting it all as it was coming out.
From a fiery
Yeah.
Leo.
Yeah.
God, of course. What about Egypt? Does Egypt figure in?
The goddess Isis figures in a little bit, but I wanted to stick to the cultures that were the root of Western civilization, and there's so much in Greece, so much in Balkans, Cyprus, and in northern Turkey that was all I could put in one book.
No, I understand. This isn't a complaint.
Yeah.
I'm just saying more that I think that the Egyptian culture figures in much more largely than you're suggesting, and I think it really came in via Judaism. Because if you look at Judaism, at least from my view, and I spent some time in Jerusalem studying at a yeshiva, and they don't say it this way, but what I perceived is a lot of the juice that was in the original Judaism is really Egyptian. I mean, when Moses came over, it wasn't Judaism that he was bringing. It was Egyptian science that got reformulated into what became a Hebraic package. You know, so anyway, I'm just saying that, and not only that, but that's a whole corner of the planet, and Greece is not that, you know, it's not that far away. It's all part of the picture. But no matter, have you read the Da Vinci Code?
I have indeed, and in fact,
Oh my!
the Da Vinci Code was
really
a
riding your
hilarious book for me to read because it dealt so much about the hidden feminine at the heart of
Yes,
Christianity,
that's why I brought
and I
it up.
realized, hey, this book is the hidden feminine at the heart of Buddhism.
Exactly.
But there's, as I say, there's fewer car chases, but more sex.
Good. Well, count me in. I'll interview when it comes out.
Okay.
Tim, it's been really a pleasure. This is really a wonderful book, and I look forward to reading it more.
Thank you, Mitch.
Again, absolutely. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for a Better World. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you got aroused through that also. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.